Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazi state implemented policies that stripped Jews of citizenship, property, dignity, and ultimately life, culminating in the Holocaust, which claimed the lives of approximately 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. Understanding why this happened requires examining a web of interconnected forces. Hitler's personal ideology, deep-rooted European anti-Semitism, economic desperation, political opportunism, and the machinery of a totalitarian state. None of these factors alone explains the Holocaust, but together they created the conditions for genocide. Hitler's personal ideology, the roots of hatred. Adolf Hitler's anti-Semitism was not a political tactic alone. It was a core conviction that defined his entire worldview. Historians trace the origins of his hatred to his years in Vienna 1908, 1913, where he encountered the virulent anti-Semitic politics of Mayor Karl Lueger and the pan-German nationalist movements of the era. Though the exact timeline of when his views crystallized is debated, by the time he wrote Mein Kampf in 1924, his ideology was fully formed. At the center of Hitler's worldview was a racial theory that classified humanity into a hierarchy of races. At the top sat the Aryan race, which he associated with Germans and Northern Europeans, whom he considered the creators of civilization. At the bottom, in his framing, stood the Jews, whom he portrayed not merely as an inferior people, but as an anti-race, a parasitic, conspiratorial force actively destroying the societies they lived within. This was not standard bigotry. Hitler genuinely believed that Jews were engaged in a cosmic struggle to undermine the German nation, and indeed all of civilization. He blamed Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, the so-called stab-in-the-back myth, for the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, for Marxism and Bolshevism, for capitalism and financial exploitation, and for cultural degeneracy. In Hitler's mind, contradictory as it may seem, Jews simultaneously controlled international capitalism and international communism, two opposing forces he claimed were secretly unified in their goal of world domination. This conspiratorial thinking was irrational, but it was deeply felt and entirely sincere. For Hitler, removing the Jews was not merely a political goal, it was a biological and civilizational necessity, a soil of long-standing European anti-Semitism. Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism. He inherited and weaponized a tradition of anti-Jewish prejudice that had persisted in Europe for over 1,000 years. Medieval Christian theology had long branded Jews as Christ killers and subjected them to forced conversions, expulsions from England in 1290, from Spain in 1492, and massacre. Jews were confined to ghettos, barred from professions, and made into scapegoats during plagues and economic crises. In the 19th century, a new, pseudoscientific form of anti-Semitism emerged. Rather than targeting Jews for their religion, modern anti-Semites attacked them on racial grounds, claiming that Jewish identity was biological and hereditary, and therefore immutable, not correctable through conversion. This racial anti-Semitism was flourishing across Europe by the time Hitler came of age, particularly in Germany, Austria, and France, as the Dreyfus Affair showed. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated Russian text purporting to reveal a Jewish conspiracy for world domination, was widely circulated in the early 20th century and taken seriously in many quarters. This cultural environment gave Hitler a ready audience for his hatred. He was not speaking in a vacuum, but amplifying fears and prejudices that already existed across much of German and European society. Beyond ideology, anti-Semitism served crucial political functions for Hitler and the Nazi Party. Germany in the 1920s was a deeply unstable society, humiliated by defeat in World War I, burdened by reparations, shaken by hyperinflation in 1923 and catastrophic unemployment after 1929. German society was desperate for explanations and scapegoats. The Nazis provided both. By blaming Jews for Germany's misfortunes, they offered a simple, emotionally satisfying explanation for complex disasters, and a unifying enemy around which to rally support. Jews were a convenient target for several reasons. They were a visible minority, about 1% of Germany's population, who occupied disproportionately prominent positions in urban professions. medicine, law, journalism, academia, and finance, due in part to historical restrictions that had funneled them into these fields. Nazi propaganda exploited this visibility, portraying Jewish economic success as evidence of exploitation and conspiracy, rather than as the result of exclusion from other professions over centuries. Antisemitism also allowed Hitler to neutralize political opponents. Marxists and socialists were labeled Jewish Bolsheviks. Democratic liberals were portrayed as serving Jewish financial interests. Pacifists were called tools of Jewish international manipulation. In this way, anti-Semitism became a master key that could delegitimize virtually any opposing viewpoint. The stages of persecution, from discrimination to genocide. The persecution of Jews under the Nazi state was not a single policy, but a progressive escalation that unfolded in stages. Upon seizing power in January 1933, the Nazis moved quickly to legislate Jews out of public life. Jews were dismissed from civil service positions, barred from practicing law and medicine, and excluded from German cultural institutions. A nationwide boycott of Jewish businesses was organized in April 1933. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 stripped Jews of German citizenship and prohibited marriage or sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews. Jewish-owned businesses were subject to Aryanization, forced transfer to non-Jewish ownership at drastically below market prices. Jews faced increasing economic isolation, unable to participate in German commercial life. On the night of November 9, 1938, Kristallnacht Night of Broken Glass, state-orchestrated pogroms swept Germany and Austria. Hundreds of synagogues were burned, thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed, nearly 100 Jews murdered, and approximately 30,000 Jewish men sent to concentration camps. The event marked a decisive shift toward organized physical violence. With the invasion of Poland in September 1939, the Nazis brought millions more Jews under their control. Polish Jews were forced into sealed urban ghettos under horrific conditions. After the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, mobile killing units Einsatzgruppen followed the German army and carried out mass shootings of Jewish populations, murdering over 1 million people in pits and ravines, most famously at Baby Yar, Ukraine, where 33,771 Jews were shot in 2 days. At the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, senior Nazi officials coordinated the systematic extermination of all Jews in Europe. The final solution to the Jewish question. 6 dedicated killing centers were constructed in occupied Poland, equipped with gas chambers. Millions of Jews from across Europe were transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, and Majdanek, where they were murdered on an industrial scale. By the time the war ended in 1945, approximately 6 million Jews, 2/3 of European Jewry, had been murdered. The persecution and murder of Jews under Hitler was driven by a unique and catastrophic convergence, a fanatical ideology that identified Jews as an existential racial enemy. Centuries of European anti-Semitism that made such hatred culturally legible, political and economic crises that made scapegoating effective, the power of a totalitarian state, and the compliance and complicity of countless ordinary individuals. The Holocaust was neither inevitable nor a product of German exceptionalism alone. It was, in the words of Holocaust scholar Deborah Lipstadt, a warning about what happens when hatred is institutionalized, when propaganda replaces truth, and when the dignity of any group of human beings is systematically denied. Understanding why it happened is not only a historical obligation, it is a moral one.